Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Michael Ceely in the High Performance Podcast, and today we are doing a vignette case study of a tennis player, and I'm pleased to welcome my guest here, Zoran Stojković. He's a certified mental performance coach.
Thanks, Mike. So, my name is Zoran Stojković, and I'm a certified mental performance consultant. And then currently, I work for the Royal Canadian Air Force as a mental performance specialist, where I work with pilots on performing in the cockpit, performing on demand. And tennis, yes, I coach tennis for 15 plus years. So I this is a great pick.
And I am going to read the vignette, and we'll have the vignette hopefully post-production across the screen, or at least down the description below for your reference. But I'm going to read that right now, and then we're going to both comment on it and see if we can provide a solution for our imaginary tennis player. So our tennis player is named Andre Anxiety, and Andre is a 22-year-old professional tennis player. He's ranked 100th in the world. He feels stuck at this ranking, and when he has an opportunity to advance, he gets nervous before and during his matches and plays below his ability. His coach and others agree he could be ranked in the top 50. Andre's started avoiding matches now where he could even advance in the rankings. And he says, I am relaxed and confident in practice, but when the stakes are high, I get stuck in my head. A little bit more background on Andre. He really fell in love with tennis at age 10 after his dad took him to watch a professional match. And his dad was also a top-ranked player in his day. Andre showed immediate natural talent, and at age 12, he decided he wanted to become a pro tennis player. His parents supported his choice, and Andre turned pro at age 16. He rose quickly through the ranks and broke the top 100 when he was 19. Andre's coach continually praises and pushes him and told Andre, you are so much more talented than I was. I know you can be the best in the world. So this is he's really like a good fit for coaching, I think, Zoran, because he is dealing with some common problems athletes face, which is anxiety before and during matches, before and during games. And there's this feeling of sort of stuckness at a level which a lot of athletes have to deal with as well. So based on all that, we have a snapshot there. What are your sort of takes on this and initial thoughts, and maybe kind of formulate like how you would work with Andre here?
What I would go into initially, even reading that, if I was talking with him the first time, I'd probably hear more about his story of how he got into tennis, like his kind of version of it, and the details and what he loves about the sport and what he dislikes. Just out of that case study, though, some of the key areas that I would tap into a bit more are he talks about practicing and being able to execute in practice, but then when the pressure is on, he's not able to. And I felt like that as a tennis player. That's why I got into mental performance.
Okay.
So I initially started reading books on it, and then my athletes who I coached in tennis had similar challenges, and I helped them overcome some of those barriers. And so it's quite a common challenge, because what happens, like when we get tense, and this is what Andre's probably experiencing with that performance anxiety, it's like we get tense because our activation level is too high. So if you think about that inverted U curve and levels of activation of low in the zone and too high, like that performance activation curve,
Right.
he's probably on the too high side, and so
Yep.
that's limiting his performance, and he's not able to execute effortlessly. And
Right.
the thing that's kind of interesting is in those moments where there's a combination, there's a high heart rate from potentially just for whatever reason, it's either psychologically or physiologically activated. There's a high heart rate. We start to get a cascade of effects in the body, right? That pushes us into more sympathetic activated state, which carries with it a survival mechanism, right? Fight or flight. We get adrenaline and cortisol that flood the body, and those are good short term. But if we're in that state longer term, it's detrimental to performance. And so
Right.
that performance anxiety is and I don't even like the word performance anxiety. I just call it high activation levels.
Yeah.
That high activation level is really limiting his performance on the court.
Mm.
He's probably experiencing, and again, this would come from a conversation with Andre, but I'll kind of color this into the scenario. Like he's probably experiencing tension in his arms, and tense arms produce weaker strokes, but also less accurate strokes on the tennis court. So, there's tunnel vision, right? So he's not able to see peripherally anymore, which is really important because when he's hitting the ball, he's got to have a bit of and looking at the ball, he's got to have a bit of a peripheral sense of where the opponent is going. There's a tendency not to hear things as well, and sound is a key feedback system in tennis. Like you want to hear your opponent hitting the ball because you can get a lot of info on what kind of spin they're hitting or how hard they're hitting the ball. Obviously, you want to be able to tune out irrelevant sounds like the crowd or anybody, like cars going by. Sometimes even for top 100 matches, you're playing on a practice court. You're not playing in the main stadium, so you can hear cars going by or a busy street or whatever. So yeah, those are kind of some of my initial thoughts.
Hmm.
Yeah, just finding, getting him a little bit more aware of that. And realizing like, hey, here's this curve. Where do you think you are? And he'd probably say overactivated. And then we would talk about the symptoms.
I really love that. So it's really reframing performance anxiety, which sounds like some horrible thing that's your
Yeah.
fault, to
Yeah.
high activation level, because that's really what's going on physiologically,
Totally.
right? And so that the athlete can go, oh, I have control over my level. Let me find some techniques. Zoran can teach me some techniques to get the optimum
Absolutely.
activation level for my performance, for my match, right?
Right.
Um, that's great
That's the
because
main,
yeah,
yeah, that's the
yeah,
main issue, I think. There's other ones, but like what do you, because you wrote this case study. So
yes, yes,
what are your thoughts about this athlete? And
yeah. So
if you triage because there's a lot that could be worked on, right?
right.
But what would you kind of start with first in that first
Yeah,
session?
so I typed this up intentionally, kind of stream of consciousness without really thinking too hard about it, so that I wanted us today to have more like an organic analysis of this. And you
Mm.
didn't study this, and I didn't spend too much time on it. Um, so yeah, really like what you said, and I totally agree with that. And I think that in working in sport performance, you got to be pragmatic. Like I'm tempted with my background in psychology and training to kind of like plumb the depths and figure out some stuff. But I have to put the brakes on that and go, what is this athlete's goal? Like his goal here, it sounds like, is to reduce anxiety, to get that more optimum performance activation state. And then also he wants to get unstuck. He wants to kind of keep advancing.
Mhm.
So I would be like, first thing is I would ask him, what are your goals? What exactly do you
Mhm.
want to achieve? Because I think often as coaches, we may have an idea of what we want for the athlete because we can see potential, right? But that would definitely start with what he wants to do. That said, like as we're working, I would also I would think about some of the relationships here, right? So
Yeah.
like, like and it's funny, before the podcast we're talking, you're saying, hey, is this like sort of Andre Agassi kind of spoof? And I didn't even think about it, but there is some similarities there, like with the dad who was also a top rank player, right? So I would want to maybe just ask some questions about like, are you getting pressure from your dad? Like the quote from Andre's coach, which is really interesting. He says, "You are so much more talented than I was. I know you can be the best in the world." I mean, right there, I see a bit of a problem, right?
What's the problem in that?
I mean, I'm taking it in the context of, if you word it that way, like, I know you can be the best in the world, is that's a lot of pressure there, like the best, number one. You're so much more talented than I was. I'd be worried about the coach maybe sort of projecting some of his past desires onto his player, right? And then maybe because that coach athlete relationship can be, very very tight, like, does Andre now want to perform for his coach, right?
And
And
now we have
and what
extrinsic motivation,
right,
which is
right,
not the best kind of motivation, and
right.
we want to keep him. And you're great on asking, what are your goals, or
Yeah,
why do you play tennis? Um, Not something I would ask in a first conversation though.
yeah,
Like we all have our own intake processes, but
right. Yep.
I'm sure you have a different one than I do, and mine has changed over the years as I've heard things from colleagues and
Yeah,
reflected on
mine
my
too.
process, right? So
Yeah.
it's like I think that's normal.
Hmm.
I think we would really need to follow the athlete's lead. Like Mark Anderson says in his book, in doing sports psychology, like just following the lead of the athlete,
Hmm.
and not making the first conversation be a quiz session.
Okay.
A lot, and so a lot of those what questions are great.
Right.
Like there's a book called the Coaching Habit, Michael Bungay Stanier, and he gives these 8 questions and how to use them as a coach. And yeah, one of the keys is using the word what, because the word
Uh-huh.
why makes it sometimes a little bit challenging, especially earlier on when you're building that rapport.
Right.
Yeah. I wonder if Andre, what is it? Yeah, if Andre
Yeah.
is the tennis player's name. I wonder if he'd even want to see us, or is it like the dad being like, you got to go see this person? So that's like
Right.
another,
Sure.
what do you think we should do for this case?
Yeah, that's something maybe I should put in this case is like who referred him because he is 22, so he's on the younger side. So is he being, sent there by his dad, by his coach? Does he really want, our help? Like that's very important to ascertain that for sure. Um, yeah, so that's important. And I like what you said too, because like just getting him talking, like let him just talk and get his story and let him vent. And like there that can be really powerful as opposed to saying, what are your goals? Because he might not even know what his goals are, right?
I do use that,
Yeah,
but not as the first question. And this
right.
is personal. Again, this is my approach.
Yeah.
The first question, the first couple minutes, chit chat,
Mhm.
whatever. Hi, hey, you're kind of looking at their body language as the person working with them.
Right.
You're looking at tone of voice, eye contact, and then you're looking if they're leaning in or leaning away, like where do they sit? There's a lot of info we get from even
Yep.
just a couple of minutes. And then um God, I just blanked on it. The story is the thing I always start with.
Yeah.
How did you get in, Andre, how did you get into tennis?
Right.
Oh, well, my dad was a pro player and I always went with him to tournaments and I loved watching. And so you put some of that in the case study.
Right.
But it's like he's kept playing. He's 22 and he's kept playing.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
a lot of athletes burn out when they're 13, 14. Some of them stop after college. Like he's post college now. Like he's kind of past that age and he's having good success. Like he's top 100. So it's like, what's your story? What do you like and dislike about tennis?
Right.
That's a great one for insight. It's like, oh, I love winning. Oh, I hate losing. And you can get a bit
Yeah.
of a peek under the hood on their motivation levels, because
Right.
motivation is one thing I wrote down as you read the case study, because it's
Yeah.
like, why do you play tennis?
Yeah.
But not getting into that right away, just kind of following his lead and
Right.
probing and prompting.
Yeah. Yeah, it is
I'm
really
sure.
it's the art, really like the art of coaching, especially in the beginning, is you have some ideas in your mind of what you want to ask, where you want to go, but there's really a power in just like letting the athlete tell the story because you could be missing some things when you're trying to, I want to solve this, right? It's like, well, give it a second. You're going to get more information if you just let the athlete talk, right? I would think. One thing that stands out to me in this vignette is the way I wrote it. Andre fell in love with tennis at age 10. So, meaning like he loves tennis. And the way he talks about it, he says, I'm relaxed and confident in practice, but when the stakes are high, I get stuck in my head. So I
He
get the
enjoys
impression,
training. He enjoys
right,
training.
right, exactly, right. So it would be different if he says, like I don't even feel like picking up a racket. Like I just don't. But like, it looks like he enjoys the game. So that's a huge asset for him. And when we're working with him, we know that he loves it. It's just more of like the pressure, right? I think that's such a that can be an issue for a lot of athletes. It's just like the pressure and the expectations, right? Because it's like
Totally.
top 100, like what is, it's like, it's almost like a mental barrier, right? So like, what's the difference between like 105th and 100? Like not that much, but when you get closer to that sort of mental barrier, like, oh, can I crack that top 50? Can I crack, it's like that becomes where we
Levels.
come into
There's
play.
levels
Like,
to it, Mike.
yeah, there's always
Because
levels.
when you're top 100, now you're qualifying. You don't have to do qualifiers for certain tournaments, so you play
Yeah.
less matches in a tournament, so you tested less
Right.
because of your ranking, so you're kind of more protected, if you will.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, you often hear the saying in tennis that like the top 100, out of the top 100 players, they're all fitness, very similar, shot execution, very similar. Yeah, there's different play styles, but like tennis and fitness are on par. But then the difference maker is, you know, the court between the ears.
I like that. The court between the
Right?
ears. Yeah. A
Yeah.
lot of
So
room in there
that's
for a tennis ball to bounce around for some of us anyway, right?
love it. You just built on that so well.
Thank you. Another thing that stands out in this too, and again, I wrote this kind of stream of consciousness, so I'm like rereading it right now, is that he broke the top 100 when he was 19, right? And now he's 22 and he's still like at that level, which is very respectable, but that's, like 3 years where he's been hovering there. So like, there's something there, right?
And
Besides just
maybe
like, yeah, like just like a
besides,
mental barrier, right? Like, I don't know, if you're 3 years, you're kind of hovering right
yeah,
around there. And I don't know, you know more about tennis than I do, but there's a lot of talented players in that top 100, right?
this is really complex
Yeah,
because the coach who takes you from 2000 in the world to 500 in the world may not be the same coach who can take you from 5 to 1
right,
and then
right,
from 100 to the top
right.
50.
Uh-huh.
So that I think that's a key consideration.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how long has he been with the coach?
Right.
What kind of work are they doing together? What's the coach's views on mental performance and sports psychology? Does he buy into it? Because you can be the best expert in the world. The coach is going to be spending, if this player's top 100, the coach is probably with him every day.
Yeah.
You can talk to him once a week. You can talk to him every day for half an hour. The coach's mindset is still going to win over. So I'd say the coach is the key piece in the puzzle, and
Yeah.
like bringing him into the conversation pretty early on,
Uh-huh.
just to and make sure the player's okay with it,
Sure.
confidentiality, that. But like,
Right.
and then the dad, how involved is the dad?
Right.
Right? Does he
Yep.
go to tournaments? Does he not? How does he perform when dad goes to tournaments?
Right.
Does dad sit in on the debriefs with the coach after?
Mm-hmm.
If so, what's the dad's role? You know what I mean? Because some
Yep.
parents, there's pro players currently whose mom or dad is their male tennis players, whose mom or dad is their coach.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a weird relationship.
Yeah. I don't think that's inherently a good one. Maybe some people can pull it off, but you need a lot of guidance if you're going to be doing that, and you need boundaries, and yeah, it can get pretty complex, right?
Totally.
Yeah. Um, Another thing I'm thinking about from this vignette here, he said, when the stakes are high, I get stuck in my head. So this is like manifesting an anxiety, definitely like physiological symptoms as well, but like stuck in my head. I'd want to ask, like what are you thinking about? Like what are the key things? Like is it worse? You imagine worst case scenarios. Like I'd want to understand what he means by stuck in my head. And I think that can be a common problem for tennis players, all athletes, is not just that physiological tension and being, overly activated or underactivated, is like what are the thoughts that creep in when you get out of the flow? Right. And typically it's like a worst case scenario, right? Do you find in your work?
What do you mean?
Well, like, okay, so like if he's let's say he's in the middle of a match and he's feeling the anxiety, and if he gets stuck in his head, I'm wondering like what is he thinking about? Is he thinking about like, I hope I don't miss this? Like, is he worried? Is he envisioning scenarios visually where he's losing? Like I'd want to
Yeah.
figure that out, right?
Mike, I think last time we did a podcast together, like we talked about the power of self-talk,
Yeah.
and I actually listened to it a couple weeks ago. And you know, there's words are powerful, man.
Yeah.
Words are very powerful, and little words and little nuances of how we talk to ourselves really impact the stories we create and the inner narrative we
Hmm.
start to buy into because the brain believes what it hears.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and so what I would do with him is that in probably in a format of like drawing it out. So
Yeah.
let's do a body map.
Okay.
You can draw out the brain, like what happens in your mind, and then it's like an arrow. Like what do you do in your mind? What happens in your mind when you were playing that last tournament?
Yeah.
What about your heart? What do you notice? Oh, I noticed. So now we're linking, we're not just talking about what do you think about, because that's not the only important thing. It's
Right.
like, what are the senses in your body? What's
Yep.
happening to your body systems? And then linking everything together and saying, okay, so that looks like it's a response to high activation levels. It sounds like you're overactivated.
Yeah.
Um, can you think of a match or a situation, but probably a match
Mm.
in the past 6 months where you've been at a lower activation level, where you've performed really well? How has it felt for those body, different
Right.
parts in your body? Have you had those symptoms? Yeah,
Mm.
my heart still beat fast. I still felt the butterflies. I still felt a bit of a tightness in my hand, but I managed to kind of breathe. And so now you're getting into like, what have you done in the past that has worked for you, which
Right.
is an important question because
Yeah.
I know, people. One of the foundational beliefs I have is that people are the experts on themselves, but we as as the mental performance specialist or consultant, my role is to help them, to give them keys to unlock the locks, to understand themselves, to get some internal analytics on themselves.
Yeah.
Um, and that's some of the ways to do that, to reflect on past events. And because, yeah, this is cool. There's definitely a lot of ways we could go with this. But after that first conversation, I definitely leave them walking away with like some kind of breathing exercise.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
What would
that's
you, yeah,
yeah, I agree. I think initially when I work with athletes especially, it is right away giving them some tools, right? They want to feel like this relationship that they're starting is going to be helpful. And just right there, it's like, yeah, giving them some breathing techniques, things like that. Like I like the drawing you did too, because there's such power for everybody, not just athletes, of having an awareness of the process that's occurring so that you can always be like the observer. So you're out there on the court and you're just observing yourself and you're not caught up in the matrix, right? Like, oh, my heart's beating, I'm noticing this, I'm noticing the tension. And that is so powerful having that awareness. And also like what you said too, of like think of a time when were feeling maybe a little high activated, but you still were, successful in your game. And that builds confidence. Like, oh yeah, I can. Like if you can pretty much always find a time when an athlete performed well, right? Like,
totally.
getting them back into that memory will actually
I
trigger
mean,
physiological
he's
state too.
he's top 100. Like he's won some
Yeah,
tournaments.
for sure. Yeah, for
You
sure.
know what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
like, hey man, like in a span of a week, you won 5 matches in a
Right.
row
Yeah.
to win a tournament, to win some points and prize money. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
what's worked? And he
Right.
might be in a bit of a slump, but yeah, breathing I think would be massive. Like just for the sake of the case, I'm gonna assume we're meeting with the athlete in person.
Yep.
That creates some cool opportunities to either go on a practice court
Right.
and see a practice session and hook them up with a heart rate monitor and
Mhm.
start to cultivate some of that awareness of activation levels, heart rate zones and stuff, an awareness of his routine between points and how to plug some mental skills like breathing and self-talk and affirmations into that.
Yeah.
Um, and I think there's a lot that we could really take this. Like there's even obviously imagery or visualizing,
Yeah.
um, seeing some of those challenging scenarios on the court and the symptoms you would feel. So it's like, here's a scenario, here's the
Right.
symptoms I would feel in my body, here's what I would see with my eyes. And then how do I want to show up when that happens? So
Right.
pairing those symptoms, now we're doing, classical conditioning or Pavlovian conditioning to
Right.
uncondition that response that he's having on the court.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
would you, what would your plan be with this athlete given what we've talked about?
Yeah, I mean, ideally in person, especially for sports like tennis, it's really helpful. And especially like if you've played it and you have the expertise too, you can, do more in person. Um, so yeah, like what you said there is you could reenact and even slow down almost like a slow speed camera like when he feels good and confident everything's going well. And then I'd even want to throw like some worst case scenarios at him and say, well, let's activate like your nightmare scenario, right? Let's do it in the safe space, right? Here I am, I'm your coach, and maybe I'm even across the court, and I get him into actually an unresourceful state just so he can slow down the process and he can notice it and observe it. I wouldn't want to do it too much because then he starts kind of like you're training him to do it. But like, I think that would be really helpful too. And then how he could maybe even use that as a trigger to go into a more resourceful state with a possible like a magic word, like a mantra, right? So it's like, strong and slow or something like that. And I would walk him through the worst case and I kind of get him out of it with some sort of a trigger so that he could feel confident and wouldn't freak out if he started feeling that way again in a match.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things we do in the Air Force here is, and this is built into the pilot training program. I had nothing to do with this, but I think it's kind of cool. So there's these critical emergencies, and they're called the red pages. And so each pilot has a checklist of what to do in every critical emergency situation. So if if you start to notice you're getting hypoxia in the air, you do this, this, this. It's a step-by-step procedure.
Yeah.
And every mission, so before they do any mission, so think about like in a tennis scenario, it's like anytime he's briefing with his coach before starting a training session on court, these guys would get an emergency scenario, the pilots, and they
Yeah.
have to be able to verbalize it. And then when they get into simulator training, they have to be able to do it. Like they're in the air, they start losing power. Their power goes to zero. It's like, okay, shit, what do I do? Right.
Yeah.
So by doing that, then we can do that with this player, either by integrating in on the court, and that involves working with the coach, or if we don't have that, we can do it through visualizing.
Right.
Visualizing the scenario and creating almost like an audio tape for him after creating an imagery script together. Like I think that would be we've talked about a lot. That's not something I would start with in a first conversation.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I would probably start with the simple, like what's level one? Like anytime you play a video game, level one is quite simple and it's made to have success. So what is level one? Probably get him started with either a little audit of his self-talk or doing the body map. I think the body map is a great one. Just go and I would maybe do that with them in the session, in the conversation.
Right.
Just the cult or doing some breathing, but I'd probably not start with the breathing, honestly. It's more of an awareness thing.
Right.
Like, hey, can we audit, do like a self-talk audit? And you're not gonna change anything. You're just gonna, for the next week until you see me next, notice what are some of the recurring thoughts in your mind. And I know last time we spoke, I talked about, helpful thoughts, unhelpful thoughts. So you can put them in those kind of categories if you want, but it's more about cultivating that awareness. And then when he comes back, he'd probably go, oh, here's some of my thoughts. And then we categorize some of the thoughts and go, hey, like, how do you think these kind of thoughts make you feel? Do they raise your energy level, lower it? Oh, they lower it. How do you think they impact your activation levels on the court? Oh, these raise it. Oh, cool. So there's situations to use every kind of self-talk, nothing's negative or positive. And so that's kind of my baseline that I start with, honestly, like just an awareness of that inner dialogue, and then moving on from there because it's so powerful. And people come back and they report their confidence going from like a 2 to a 4 within a week.
Yeah.
And I'm like, we haven't done anything. You've just noticed your self-talk and how you're able to manage it. And they're like, oh my God, you're so good at what you do. And I'm like,
yeah,
thank you.
you're just like, it's just the basics, man. But for people who've never
totally
experienced, your kind of coaching, it is like very illuminating because no one ever asks them like, hey, write down your self-talk, right? No one has made a body map for them. This is like kind of mind-blowing for them, right? Um, I think I agree. Like awareness of it just itself is so empowering for an athlete who's going through some of this because a lot of the anxiety is the mystery. Like, why is this happening? Like, what's wrong with me? You know? And then when we demystify and give them some awareness, it just it can be so like liberating. Like, oh, it's not my fault. Like, it's human physiology, and other people do this. And like you said, within the first week, they're like, oh man, I feel so much better. So, yeah, I think we're off to a good start with Andre anxiety here, and I think between the two of us, he would be well served. I think, yeah, a lot of good stuff here. So, a couple key takeaways. Let's wrap things up here. I just was taking some notes here. For me, the key takeaways from our conversation, this analysis, again, awareness. It is basic and it's huge, right? It's so powerful. Just that, that mind body awareness, kind of the mechanisms that are happening. Some practical, pragmatic tools for the athlete. Some maybe some breathing, some things that are going to immediately help just even a little bit. And the other thing, Mike, takeaway here too was like relationships. Like you mentioned, the coach that got you to this level may not be the coach you get to the next level. And that's some hard conversations that might have to happen. So what about you, like key takeaways?
Fire the coach. No,
Fire the coach.
that's the solution. That's always the
Right,
solution.
right.
When anything's wrong, it's the coach's fault. No, I would say for me, the main one is that ecosystem around the athlete.
Yeah.
How can we pretty quickly understand that without only the athlete's self-reflection or observation, because they might be censoring something about that.
Right.
So is there an opportunity to watch the athlete in training very casually, be on the court or off the court, doesn't matter, but to observe some of those interactions with the coach?
Yeah.
Maybe talk to the dad on the sideline if the dad's quite involved. Because I think that'll also give analytics into the inside of the athlete, actually.
Yeah.
But I would not start that right away. Initially, it's just the athlete, and I usually recommend that after building a rapport and a trust, and the athlete sees that the skills we're using are working.
Yeah.
That's kind of my key takeaway. I think this is really cool because I love case studies, man, because this felt very real for me. It felt like we were talking about a real athlete, and
yeah, me too. Yeah.
Yeah, like Andre, if you're out there, like there's
there's hope. There's hope, Andre.
There's hope.
Yeah. Well, great, Zoran. We're going to wrap things up.
Cool.
Thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today. I love your work. I always love your insights, and I've learned a lot during our conversation here, and I hope everyone out there watching and listening has learned something too. And if you're an athlete who is struggling with some performance stuff or energy optimization, optimized levels, etc., like it's very, very common. The best athletes go through it. It happens to everyone. There are some techniques out there that can help you. Mental performance coaching can be a solution for you. So thanks everyone for watching and listening. Zoran, thanks for joining. And
thanks. And if anybody has questions, I'm available online. Like happy to provide it. Yeah, just a quick response or any kind of resources. So just at Kizo Performance or kizo.ca.
Right. Good stuff. And you can go to michaelceely.com also for some of my coaching. And then my last name is spelled Ceely. I'll leave some in the description below the links to those websites. And thanks again, everyone. So this has been the case study of Andre anxiety. And everyone, please be well and keep on leveling up.